Good. So how did it all begin?
Well, in 2010, when I was riding my bike, I started having problems with my power output. And I've been racing since I was 19 years old, and I have a power meter on my bike. My power meter was showing that I had a reduction in power. I didn't know what it was, and I was concerned about it because I like to compete. So I hired a coach and worked on it for another 3 or 4 years, and finally sort of gave in and decided to go see a cardiologist. And then sort of all hell broke loose. They put me on an ergometer, and I started having a little electronic signal in the EKG that showed that I had ischemia, which is reduced blood flow to the heart. And it was funny because the day before before I went in, my doctor said, "Oh, I don't think you're going to have a problem at all. You look so healthy, and you've been competing." And after the signal came up, my doctor said, the only way to really check to see if you have a problem is to undergo an angiogram. And at this point, I had a PhD, but it was in nutrition, and I didn't really know any of this stuff, so I'm just following the doctor's orders. So in 2 weeks, I went in and had an invasive angiogram. They stick a wire in your artery and inject a dye into your heart. You're actually awake on the table when this is happening, which is kind of a weird thing. You have a mild sedation. My wife was in the waiting room, and I had an interventional cardiologist doing the procedure, but my medical cardiologist was on call and in the room watching what's going on. And he had discussed with me before that if we find something, we'd put a stent in it. And a stent is a little metal scaffolding that goes in the artery and opens up the artery to its normal length, or width. And we had, I think, 5 different blockages in my artery. Now this is the same year that I had won 3rd place in the regional cycling championships and had a VO2 max of 60 milliliters per kilogram at the age of 55, and nobody thought that I would have a problem. We actually noticed...
So tell me a little bit about what was your status at the point. You were a biker, correct?
Yes, a cyclist.
So tell me a little bit. When this happened, you were competing, or so tell me a little bit that story.
Yeah, so I didn't have any sort of symptoms, actually. I didn't have any acute problems. I didn't notice anything that was particular to heart disease at all. All I had was I wasn't performing as well as I used to.
Okay. Now, tell me about at that stage in your life, tell me about your bicycling. You were competing then?
Yeah, I was competing at a national level and a local level.
So at that time
At that time I was competing at a national level and a local level, and I was getting like 22nd place at nationals and 3rd at the regional. So I was a good racer, and this is age group, but I wasn't doing anything spectacular.
Okay. So there you are leaving the hospital with a stent.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me.
So I was on the table, and I had a stent put in my artery, and we thought that everything would be hunky-dory, and that I would have performance back to where I was before I had the stent put in. And unfortunately, what ended up happening was I was retested in 4 months, and my exercise capacity actually went down.
That's 2.
So I'm finding myself looking at you.
Yeah, I'll stand right here.
Should I look at the camera?
You can look at me, that's fine.
Because I've been looking at the camera.
That's fine.
Okay.
So so you find yourself...
Right, in 2014, which was 3-4 months after I had my procedure, I found out that my exercise capacity was actually going down. And so that was obviously not a good thing, because we thought the stent would have fixed me. But I had these 4 other lesions that they couldn't work on because they were the arteries were too small to stick the stent in. So I really had a little bit of a scare here, because the option at that point was I would continue to get worse, even though they had put me on a statin, And so at that point I started doing some heavy research, and I actually made the decision to quit my job and take care of myself 100%. I'd saved some money, and my wife was supporting me, and I had a research background, so I went into intense research for about 5 months. I read several books, including Caldwell Esselstyn's book on reversing heart disease, and I read Colin Campbell's book on the China study and various other books. I was looking at the Okinawa program by Suzuki, and really I was thinking anybody can write a book. So as a researcher I started going back and looking at the original citations in the book and reading the original science. So it took me about 5 months of trying to convince myself that I didn't have to go on the diet that I was going to go on, which was a low-fat, whole food plant-based diet. So it included no animal products, no milk, no meat, no eggs, and it was very low in fat, naturally whole.
So when you started doing your research, maybe like a big bullet point, what did you find?
So when I did my research, what I found out is that animal products and fat really lead to heart disease. I had really no other risk factors except genetics, and genetics are not the end-all be-all. They don't determine your future. It's your genetics involved with the environment. And it was pretty easy for me because I was lean, I'd always exercised, so it was the diet that was the problem. And from the research I could clearly see that I needed to cut out fat and animal products.
Okay. What else did you find out?
Well, Dean Ornish was another author I'd looked at, and he had published some very good studies looking at meditation and exercise as part of the solution. So I was already exercising, and I also began to meditate. I did that about halfway through my program, so it took me about 4 years to get where I'm at now. But I started doing meditation every day to help reduce stress and get control over my mind, and that seemed to help too.
Okay. What has been your path since your realization that, okay, I need to change my diet, I need to address the issue in this manner versus, so what has been your path since then? You've done more research?
Yeah, so when I've done my research, I also found out that although a lot of people want to get in either a medication camp or a diet camp, I decided that there was really good research on medication. And going forward, I actually decided to present myself as a case study that I could publish on in a scientific journal. So working with my doctor at Massachusetts General Hospital, we put me on a very strict medication regime where I was lowering my cholesterol. My LDL I took from about 140 down to 20, and my total cholesterol I took from near 200 down to about 70.
So now you want to be kind of like the spokesperson, correct? Or what's next? Because I think there are some steps that you want to do now, correct?
Right. One of the things that I want to do is to continue to follow my progress. So interestingly, diet itself, being on a whole food plant-based diet, has been shown in studies to significantly reduce the plaque in the arteries, and the medications have also. So I've been doing both because I wanted basically 100% chance of improving. So in most of the studies, and there's only been 2 or 3 big studies on this, only about 30% of the people actually regress the plaque in their arteries. And given I wanted to be back to my athletic ability before I started slowing down, I wanted a better chance. That's why I did the medication and the dietary regime. And I just had my second angiogram this year, and it showed that most of my arteries got wider, meaning there was less plaque, and one of my arteries had a complete reversal of a 65% stenosis or blockage, went from 65% blocked to 100% unblocked.
Okay, that's fantastic, huh?
Plus I want to show you that before you leave. I have a picture of it.
I want to just change one thing, if you don't mind. There's one thing when we talked, actually, you said you realized, like, I want to teach people how to speak to their doctor, which I think we haven't covered yet. And I find that's probably like the most important.
For to teach people how to talk to their doctor?
Yes.
Yeah. That's kind of a key thing. So like, and how do you choose your doctor and all that sort of stuff?
So maybe what we can talk is about this is like, the medical, world is fantastic, but they don't, they just say, okay, there's a stent, go home. And they don't tell you like, because you did the research, you did this, but if somebody doesn't do the research.
Okay. So if you see your doctor and he tells you because you have chest pain or a stent, like in my case, you might want to rethink and talk to your doctor, or maybe even find another doctor, because there have been multiple studies done showing, and actually new guidelines for cardiologists are not to use a stent or bypass as a first line of defense. They always want you to do lifestyle modification, is what they call it, and medications. Now the interesting thing is that since even if you're strictly following something like the Dean Ornish diet, which is a low-fat, whole food plant-based diet, and take your medications, not always will you reduce your chances of having a heart attack or making your arteries better. So there are some guidelines now that are leaning toward having very low LDL cholesterols, as low as 20 or below, and that tends to open up the arteries. So if you're talking to your doctor, one of the things you want to discuss is what do they think about diet? And after you've looked at my website and you've read some of these books and some of these articles, you'll notice that you really have to be on this low-fat plant-based diet to really make inroads, because otherwise if you're just hitting it with cholesterol drugs, you're not really hitting it where the problem is, which is the diet and the lifestyle. So talk to your doctor about that and see how responsive your physician is to this, and note that what you want to do is you want to regress or cure your heart disease. You don't want to just sort of monitor it and let it progress at a slower rate, because right now cardiology has this sort of gestalt, if you will, or their plan is to slow the progression. The thought in the medical community is that atherosclerosis is a progressive disease, and with the medications and the rehab that they put you through is to slow the progression. Well, if you're going to forego a stent or bypass surgery, that might not be enough for you. You may want to actually regress the plaques, regress the disease, or the way that I like to say it now is to actually cure the disease. So that's kind of the way that we need to be looking at it.
So what is the guidelines for a doctor? Like, let's say you get stents, you're done, you see your doctor, you're going to go home.
Right.
What do they advise? What has been the...
Yeah, so mostly what you'll get from a doctor right now, a cardiologist that's doing a procedure on you or hasn't done a procedure yet, is they try to get your LDL cholesterol to around 100 or so. LDL is the bad cholesterol. Or if you've had a stent, the new guidelines are around 70. And part of the reason that is it's difficult even with a high-dose statin to get your LDL below 70. There's a new class of drugs out now called PCSK9 inhibitors, which is an injectable drug that works in a different mechanism completely and has a much safer side effect profile. Those drugs now can get you well below an LDL of 50. And the newest studies show that this really significantly increases your chances of regressing the plaque with no actual need to have a bypass surgery or a stent. Now, mind you, if you're having a heart attack and a medical emergency, stents do save lives, but the studies show that stents and bypass don't actually prolong life. So you need to keep that in mind when you're talking to your physician about this.
What do you think is... For me, it seems like a doctor, they don't... They know they're supposed to lower your cholesterol, but they don't say, okay, you gotta go lower your cholesterol. They just say, okay, you're fine now, just eat what you can, what you want, you got the medicine. They don't say...
Right, so your general practitioner, not your cardiologist, you're just seeing your regular physician, he might try to get your cholesterol down to a certain level, whatever that number is. If you're actually having symptoms and you see a cardiologist, then it becomes a different story. But rarely, and in my case particularly, going to a top hospital, diet was never discussed with me. Now, interestingly, I have a PhD in nutrition, and I didn't know about cardiac disease and reversing the disease through nutrition. This was something I learned the hard way. So yeah, your physician may or may not, but probably won't talk to you about nutrition. And in many cases, if you bring up something like Caldwell Esselstyn or Dean Ornish, and say that these programs advocate using a low-fat, plant-based diet, they may be either disinterested or actually against it. And my advice, if you have to argue with your physician against the science on this, it might be a good time to look for a different doctor.
Okay. Did being an athlete change your perspective?
On heart disease.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, being an athlete and having heart disease is sort of a completely different story, because most people that have heart disease are doing their regular jobs and they just want to be able to survive. And I was trying to operate at an elite level. And interestingly, after I went through this program of going on a low-fat, plant-based diet and getting healthier, in addition to the medication regime, I went from getting, third place at regionals and 20th or 30th place at nationals to getting a second and a third at national events. And last year in 2018, I took fourth at the World Championships and set the national record for the hour. So not only have I been regressing my disease, but my athletic endeavors have actually excelled on this particular regime. So translating that into the general public, or for anybody who's interested in doing this on their own, think about playing with your grandkids or your kids, or going hiking, or just walking through the grocery store, depending on what your level of activity is. You should be able to improve beyond the point of where you started.
Okay, let me stop. I think you got some stuff going on. Okay, so tell me a little bit how you would talk to your doctor.
Yeah, so I actually sought out my doctor because he was specifically a physician, cardiologist that dealt with athletes. So for me, I already had that in mind, and having a PhD and being used to talking to doctors was actually relatively easy. A lot of people are timid to bring up questions with their physician or what have you. And I think one of the things you can do is bring in maybe a video of me and my story and have the physician watch a clip. But you can also ask these very specific questions. Do they advocate diet? And don't be antagonistic or confrontational, but just sort of question. And because you're going to be going in very educated after watching some of these videos and reading some of my blogs, is you're going to know that diet is important. You're going to know that the LDL needs to be below 50. And so when you're speaking to your physician, just do it very conversationally, non-confrontationally, and see how they react. Unfortunately, a lot of physicians want to be the boss and they want to tell you what to do. And if you find that you can't really relate to the physician, there's no problem in getting a second opinion or even seeking a different doctor. And one of the things I suggest is to actually look online for physicians. There are websites available where you can look for physicians that advocate either a vegan diet, we like to call it whole food plant-based, and look for a physician that's more in line with you. But if you have limited opportunities, or you like your physician, just talk to them very matter-of-factly, and you can actually bring some of the studies that I have on the website that you can bring to them and show them and say, well, what about this? And that's one of the things I did with my physician. We actually worked hand in hand, and over a 4-year period, we worked together to develop this program that I'm on right now.
Fantastic. What you do? Okay. What is the evidence that this diet works?
That's a great question. The evidence that low-fat, whole food, plant-based diets work are based originally in population studies. So if you look at some of the major populations like the Sardinians, the Church of Adventists, the Okinawans, and certain populations within China have very, very low heart attack rates and very low rates of atherosclerosis. And one of the common threads with that, and another book that's out called Blue Zones, which Sardinians and some of these other groups are associated with, tend to eat in this way. And although they're population studies, you can't draw firm conclusions from that. There are interventional studies such as the Dean Ornish study, and there's some studies out of India that actually have done clinical trials where they put people on this diet and do invasive angiograms, quantitative angiograms, where they stick a wire in the artery, take pictures of the heart, and see the progression or regression of the arteries. And in two of the major studies, including Dean Ornish, but also Caldwell-Esselstyn has some studies on this as well, showing in an interventional situation where only diet is used, these arteries get cleaner and they actually open up, and in the angiograms you can see wider arteries. There are also animal studies using certain studies on apes, looking at the closest relative to us, feeding them low-fat diets and high-fat diets, and actually alternating and watching when they're on a high-fat diet and a less of a plant-based diet, they tend to get atherosclerosis as well. When they remove those items from the diet, they get better. So you have population studies, you have interventional studies with people with heart disease, and you have animal studies all showing the same thing, that diet matters, and diet can reverse or cure your heart disease.
So, heart disease is a major issue. It affects a lot of people. The first response from the medical establishment is medicine. So what's your take, and how do we proceed in a safer or more healthier place?
Well, there's about 800,000 people a year die from heart attacks in the United States alone, and over 1.5 million people in the United States have known heart attacks, and a large percentage of people have silent heart attacks, where they may have what they think is indigestion and don't even know they have a heart attack. So this is, and it also happens with strokes as well. So if you're just at a high-risk group or what have you, and you're taking a statin, but your doctor isn't talking to you about diet, this is a very serious situation, because it's the lifestyle that's generating this. We are not statin deficient in the United States. We are nutrient deficient, and we're taking in too many calories and too many of the wrong calories.
Okay. How about the medicine? Are we taking too much medicine blindly just at the order of the doctor?
Well, there's a lot of side effects to statins, and there is actually a recent study showing that statins work on a particular mechanism in the cell that affects the whole cell in your body. And statins diffuse through the whole body and work on all of your cells. And there are a lot of side effects to statins. Although they do reduce heart attack rates by about 30%, some of the diets that we're talking about in certain populations in interventional studies have a much greater effect than the medicines. So you can't just rely on taking a statin and thinking this is going to cure your situation, because as I said, on average, you still have a 66% chance, above zero chance of having another incident. So the statins are only partially protective. It really needs to be looked at from the core and what's causing the problem. And unfortunately, in the medical community now, with the amount of time that physicians have with their patients, there's not a lot of education either for physicians on nutrition, so they're not comfortable or educated in talking about nutrition. But quite honestly, even the nutritional community, the nutritionists and licensed nutritionists don't know enough about this whole food plant-based diet to really give people the educated and the knowledge that they need from an educational standpoint to see where they really should be. And this is a problem stemming from the education in nutrition. When I was a graduate student, I was originally being trained by people out of the American Dietetic Association, which is heavily influenced by industry. When I went into pure research, I could look at the real data and what was happening on a biochemical basis, and it is truly a necessity to change the diet which is causing the problem. So a whole food plant-based diet means eating foods that are natural and in their more natural state, instead of eating something that has very refined qualities to it like candy bars or highly processed foods. You're eating things like spinach and corn and kale and whole wheat pasta and whole wheat bread, things that are much more in their natural state, where the nutrients are. It's not the same as eating a candy bar and taking a vitamin.
And one of the major problem is diabetes, correct? So do you want to speak a little bit about this?
Right, so diabetes is actually a big killer, and diabetes actually can lead to heart disease, and I think that the statistic is something like you have 3 times greater chance of having heart disease if you have diabetes.
Can I just go by, from the medicine, I think there's a risk, correct?
Right. So there's a risk of, and actually a brand new study came out in the British Journal of Medicine showing an increased risk of having diabetes if you're on a statin, and it's not an insignificant risk. I think it increases your risk about 30%. So just taking a statin or a high-dose statin, a large dose of statin, could put your risk of diabetes, which paradoxically can increase your risk of heart disease.
Awesome. Okay, just pause this.
I think it's in the British Journal of Medicine. I'm trying to quote these things out of there.
Okay, so medication, they work, they don't work.
Probably a combination of the two. The combination of the most effective, I think, is to take a combination of the two. But
Okay, so while I ask this question and then you can go from there. Is there synergy between medication and diet?
yeah, I think that medication and diet can work together, and I'm not saying to anybody not to take their medicine. Of course, anytime you want to make a change, you need to talk to your doctor about it. But interestingly, there's never been a study that looked at the difference or superiority or inferiority between a whole food plant-based diet, which is known to reverse heart disease, and the medications. As a matter of fact, the newer drugs, the Repatha, PCSK9 inhibitors, those drugs, when they're doing those studies, they're only looking at the drug alone. They're not looking at medication, at diet at all. So my belief is that there's a synergy between the two, and that if you've been sick your whole life and you're just starting out in this, I think it's a good idea to use both. And in my particular situation, I've been on a PCSK9 inhibitor to lower my cholesterol quite significantly. And if you look at my website, you can see that I'm actually taking 4 different lipid medications. I'm taking niacin, ezetimibe, a very low dose statin. I'm actually taking half the lowest dose of pravastatin. And I'm also taking PCSK9 inhibitor. So I'll just rephrase it. I'm taking Repatha, which is a PCSK9 inhibitor, Zetia, niacin, and a very low dose statin, which drops my total cholesterol below 100 and my LDL cholesterol close to 20. In addition to that, I exercise at least an hour a day, meditate for at least 30 minutes a day, and I take a low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet. So that's a lot, but I'm also reversing my disease, and I have posted on my website showing a reduction already in the plaques in all of the arteries in my heart. So it may be happening a little faster because I'm doing all the different things, but the closer you can stick to a good regime, the better outcome you'll have.
Okay. Do me a favor, can you straighten up a little bit? Yeah, that's perfect. And then what about meditation and exercise in reducing plaque?
Yeah, meditation. Meditation is important because meditation reduces your inflammatory markers or your inflammation in your blood, which leads to heart disease. Meditation is a key feature in reducing stress and cortisol in your blood, so you can heal and feel better and feel
better. Is good.
You got another question there. You said meditation and what else? And exercise. Exercise is real important as well, and there is a really good study showing that the more you exercise, there was a study that just looked at exercise alone and how wide the arteries got, or how much a reduction in plaque. And there's a direct linear relationship by how much somebody exercised and the amount of opening of their arteries were that had heart disease. In other words, the more you exercise, the better your arteries were. So exercise is of key importance here. In the Dean Ornish program and in some of the other programs, they just recommend walking an hour a day. But if you're an athlete, you can do more than that. Something you have to talk to your physician about. But exercise is a key feature to getting better.
Excellent.
It's going to be a lot of work to edit this.
That's okay. Does your wife follow your diet? I know that's an important question.
Yeah, absolutely. My wife follows the diet. As a matter of fact, she's a great cook, and we're going to be posting some of her recipes on our website for whole food plant-based. She makes our spaghetti sauce and so forth, but she follows the diet 100% along with me, and has also noted increased energy and so forth. She doesn't have active heart disease. She's actually been tested on the same bicycle ergometer that I was. My doctor does a VO2 max test, and she came out totally clean, but she's following the same program I am just so she can be as healthy as I am.
You're working on 2 different websites, correct? So tell me a little bit about them. Yes.
Right. So I have 2 websites. I have curingheartdisease.com and I have reversingmyheartdisease.org. There are 2 companies. The reversingmyheartdisease.org is designed strictly to collect and distribute money for research. We just started this website. We haven't started doing any fundraising at this point, but the notion is that there needs to be a lot more research in how to reverse heart disease and cure heart disease, and not necessarily from a medical standpoint, but through a integrative medicine standpoint. That's not being done right now. There was an $80 million grant that was just awarded last year for curing heart disease through the American Heart Association and the Brigham and Women's Hospital. The chief investigator there will be looking at the biochemical and biomarkers and medications and all sorts of things to look at the body's response to heart disease and that sort of thing. But my goal is to have research to be done on what's already known. For example, what has Dean Ornish done? What have I done myself personally to reverse heart disease and cure heart disease? Where do you know what the tools are? We need research to show how medicine can work better with the diet, which is not being done. There's not a single study looking at the combination of medication and diet, this type of diet, to reverse and to cure heart disease. Those sorts of studies need to be done. We need to raise money to do that. And I think even as importantly is to raise research money to look at the psychological aspects to changing people's habits, and having a network of support groups, and having the hospital and medical community support lifestyle changes and have communities where we can do that. I currently run a support group for lifestyle change out of my house for athletes that have heart disease. We have a couple of people that aren't athletes that have heart disease. And one of the things that we do in the group is I do a little mini lecture on anything that's topical that somebody's interested in discussing. But we support each other with this diet and exercise program in an environment that's truly a toxic environment. The Western society, not just the United States, has a lot of advertising and presentation of bad foods. McDonald's on almost every corner. People don't know what to eat. So we try to support each other for what the scientific literature shows is the way to go, and to try to be good at that. And I think that there needs to be research and dollars for programs for people to be able to do that and to be able to take care of themselves in a reasonable way. People now are confused.
Great, that was awesome.
I could talk more about the nutrition I'm better at.
How about you have a second site, correct?
Yeah, so my other site is curingheartdisease.com, and that is a site that will be presenting the data, and through me doing lectures, presenting data, and showing people what the medical community actually has published. A lot of the studies don't make it to the light of day. I'm a published scientist myself, and one of my best papers has 38 citations in 4 years. That's buried in the medical literature. The general population isn't going to read those studies. So my goal is to sift through the medical literature and bring that to you, the public, or to a physician who might be interested in looking at this to see what the actual facts are. You're not going to get it necessarily from the Boston Globe, the New York Times, or USA Today. There's a lot of publications that, or a lot of information that's published in popular journals that say eggs are good, eggs are bad, and people get very confused. Here's a hint, eggs are bad for you, and the newest study just came out showing that. So there, from the population studies and the interventional trials, we already know what the answer is. We just need to get that word out to the general public.
Let me just start this. So, personally, what has been the biggest effect of our disease with you and your family on a personal level?
The biggest effect that I've had from being on my program is I feel fantastic. Cardiovascular disease untreated is 100% a progressive and fatal disease. My father, my mother, my younger brother all died from heart disease. My older brother is disabled from heart disease, and my whole family had diabetes. I don't have diabetes, I do have heart disease, but I was heading down a pathway that I didn't want to be because I saw what it did to my family. And now I'm competing for a world record, having just set a national record in cycling. That's not supposed to happen. As a matter of fact, what's supposed to happen is, at best, you just stay the way you are and you're fine. So that wasn't good enough for me. I didn't want to just survive, I wanted to thrive. And that's what I'm doing now. And I'm looking forward to hopefully living healthy to at least 90, maybe 100. As long as I'm healthy, I'm okay with that.
Well, that was great.
What's the question? Oh, you hit the camera.
Oh, big time.
Amateur. I was doing that the other day because I was running back behind my video camera. I kept hitting it. I was like, damn.
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, it doesn't have to be.
It seems like it's like a little, yeah.
There's something moving?
No, it looks like it's pointed over here.
No,
I'm over
you're actually on that side.
You want me to be there? Okay.
That's perfect. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna go. Okay. So, what were we talking about?
My family died from heart attack.
Yeah. So you did that. So what advice you would give? So you bump into somebody at a coffee shop and say, "Well, just was diagnosed with heart attack." What would be? Well, this is from everything I've learned. This is what I would say.
So if I ran into somebody in a coffee shop that had a heart attack, the first thing I would say is go to my website. Look at what I have on my website. I have resources, other websites that you can look at and get information from other sources as well. But question your doctor. Always question your doctor. Question the status quo. And remember, you can always get better. Yeah, so if you've been diagnosed with heart disease, know that you don't just have to survive. You don't even just have to get better. You can thrive.
I think we basically covered everything.
I like that.
Yeah.
Thrive.
We can end with that.
You're in the survival mode, I think.
Yes, we all are. Well, I think you're probably like much more, but definitely.
Yeah, I mean, you're a little bit oblivious and people don't want to think about it. They want to think, okay, so I had a heart problem, I was taken care of, I had a stent put in.
Well, yeah, and then the doctor says nothing. Yeah, take your medicine.
Take your medicine, and then I want to look this up and put this on my website. But the revascularization is the term they use, where they have to put another stent in. They actually can go in and put 2 or 3 stents inside stents. They do it all the time because people get worse. Because they don't address the real problem. And if you put somebody on a statin, and we don't know what your cholesterol is, but if you have heart disease and they put you on a statin and they drop your LDL from 150 to 100, you're still going to have heart disease. The science shows you have to be below 50 to not have heart disease. So that's why I'm concerned about you and everybody else, because it's a slow process, but we don't know when it's going to happen. And you may go in, and the revascularization rate is, I want to say it's close to 100%, meaning that if you have a procedure done, you're quite likely before you die either to have another procedure or die from the disease. So you're not curing people.
Mm-hmm. What's the difference between a plant-based diet and a vegan diet?
Well, so that's a great question. What is the difference between a plant-based diet and a vegan diet? So they both involve not eating animals or animal products. The difference is that a whole food plant-based diet, and particularly a low-fat whole food plant-based diet, is a subset of what you would call a vegan diet. Although vegans tend to be people, and historically, that are doing it for religious or moral reasons. They're not eating animals. And on a vegan diet, you can eat anything that's not animal-based. So you can eat donuts and all kinds of garbage. And a whole food plant-based diet, by virtue of the fact that you're not eating animals or animal products, could be considered vegan. But it's very specific in that you don't eat highly refined foods, and you eat plants that are not high in fat. Now maybe you can have a couple of nuts here or there, but you're striving for a 10% caloric intake of fat, no more in your diet. It's very low. The average American is 40%. So if you can strive for that, I'm not perfect. I'm more like 12 to 15%, but I'm always trying to get closer to the 10%. And the fat that I eat are nuts, and sometimes I eat a little bit of peanut butter and a little bit of avocado, but I don't use any added oils in my food. And you really want to try to keep the fat content down, but there is a significant difference because you're looking at healthy whole foods and try to keep the fat content down. And even at that, the studies show that vegans still are much healthier regardless of from people that eat than people that eat meat.
Okay, so
Yeah, so now see, I'm like freezing up, but no, when I was first diagnosed, I was absolutely stunned. I had no idea that I would have heart disease in my life. And after seeing my father and my mother die, and it was a long, hard process. They didn't die right away. It was terrible. They had bypass surgeries. Then my brother died suddenly. When I was first diagnosed, I was shocked. I was completely shocked and stunned, and I think it took me about a year to get over it, but I decided that I was going to fight it and I wasn't going to succumb to the disease.
fantastic. I think we got